So welcome to this webinar. We are very excited to do this webinar because one of the things that we have special here are, two students and who've taken the bar and passed the bar with the online bar exam experience. So while we could, of course, talk to you and tell you all about what it's going to be like, we figured maybe people who actually took the exam could tell you what it was like for them so that you can have, they were the guinea pigs, but the guinea pigs who passed, and they can tell you a little bit about their experience. Okay, let me share my screen. Can everyone see that? Taking the online bar exam. Okay, great. So tips, tricks, everything in between, for some of you, this is your first time taking the bar exam online. For some of you, if you're repeat takers, this is your second time. This is for everyone taking the bar exam this season. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about, the logistics of the actual exam, the content, how do you study and practice for the exam that is different than you would for a normal bar exam that is written, and then the actual experience of the online exam taking. So do we want to start with the logistics? Brittany or Melissa, do you want to talk a little bit about that, or should I just kind of go through this roadmap?
No, I can talk about some of it.
Okay.
Well, the first thing, what we learned from fall online bars, I think that the people likely best to talk about that are the people who've taken it. So we'll probably get there in a little bit. But I think that some of this stuff is just kind of important to check. So make sure that you meet or have everything to meet your jurisdictional requirements and check what they are. So some states are still requiring you to take the exam in a room by yourself. So some states make exceptions for that. If you take it in your law school and there's a law school classroom, other people can be in the same room. So you want to make sure that you check whatever your jurisdiction is going to allow. Same thing goes for your computer and software. Make sure that your computer can support the particular software that you need to take this online bar exam. And make sure that you have reliable Wi-Fi. And if not, you can come up with a backup plan and a place to take the exam where you do have reliable Wi-Fi. Testing locations just means, probably like the biggest, I think, worry maybe is like, where are you going to take this exam? It's remote, but sometimes home is not the best place for everybody to take the exam. So if it's not, then you can look for or try to find a different testing location. I always recommend reaching out to your law school or the law school you went to try to find a location, because I know that at mine, if someone can't find a place to take it, I'll find them one within the school or somewhere else. So you just want to make sure that's something you should be thinking about, I think, now, just so you know where you're going to take the exam and you're all set. Because you don't want to take the exam, obviously, with a lot of distractions. Now more than ever, when the bar exam was administered in the fall remotely, it was only half of the test. So it was only 100 questions, 1 MPT, and 1 essay. Now you need a longer period of time without distractions because it's the full UBE online. So you want to make sure that if you do or have the possibility of having distractions at home, you can minimize those in some way. Let people know you're taking the exam. I don't know, put it on Facebook that you're taking the exam. Just like broadcast that you're taking this exam over the course of 2 days. What another thing that I think perhaps the people who've taken the exam might be better situated to talk about this later too, but just note that there is going to be online exam proctoring. So that's why you need a quiet space with no one around you so that the online proctoring system doesn't flag you for cheating. Now, if you are flagged for cheating, does it mean you're going to fail the exam and your test gets thrown out? No. A real person will then watch the clip that was flagged to see what's going on. So if like your dog runs past you, you want to eliminate that from happening, but you never know. Like if your 2-year-old opens the door and your dog runs in, I don't even think that's realistic. Can a 2-year-old open a door? Anyway, so if your child runs, Andres is saying yes. And so if that happens, you know, a real person will watch the clip and see, is it actually cheating, or is it maybe just a person's like life blowing up for like 1 second. And so that's why you want to eliminate distractions, and you want to be aware of that online proctoring, which we'll talk a little bit about, and eliminating the appearance of cheating in a little bit.
Can I add something really quick about testing locations, Britt? There is a minimal benefit in terms of memory and recall to taking an exam where you studied. So scientists have found that if we need to recall something where we learned it, there's an advantage. So if you do all of your studying in your home office, part of the benefit of a remote exam is you're going to recall some of that information better. You have to balance that against what Brittany was talking about with eliminating distractions, because that benefit of recall is not going to outweigh a crying baby or multiple roommates or whatever it is that's kind of getting in the way of making your test location quiet. Also for the Wi-Fi, there's a lot we don't know yet about February, because as Brittany said, it's going to be a full exam versus the half exam, and they have not released whether some of the rules in terms of proctoring have changed. But one thing that happened in October, and I would like Deb and Andres to potentially confirm this, you needed reliable Wi-Fi at the beginning and the end, but if you had a glitch for the Wi-Fi while you were typing kind of in the middle, that wasn't going to be the end of the world. So when we say reliable Wi-Fi, you know, everyone sometimes has those little dips. If it dips out in the middle of your exam, that's probably okay.
It is actually.
Yeah,
it is completely okay, because it's just being recorded. So while you're taking the exam, artificial intelligence is recording you, so you don't really actually need internet while you're taking the exam.
Correct. Right. And I know that then California made that very clear for those of you who are taking the California exam, that you just needed it in the beginning and you needed it in the end. And I don't think it was made clear necessarily in all jurisdictions, but I know California made it clear that as long as you have it in the beginning and as long as you have it in the end, it's okay if something happens, you know, in the middle, because, you know, and that ends up happening. It happens to me. You know, my internet goes out all the time. So then that should put you at ease.
Yeah, and I think just the last point too on this is that the bar, or this exam, is the full, so that's a nice segue. It is the full test. So it's the 200 questions, 2 MPTs, and 6 essays online. And so only, I think, DC released this so far, but I think that other states will likely do the same. So instead of doing 2 MPTs back to back and 6 essays back to back and 100 multiple choice back to back, I think what they'll do is students take 1 MPT, then there's like a little bit of a break, maybe 15 minutes or so, then the second MPT, then a long lunch break, then 3 essays, 15-minute break, then another 15. And so the MBE, I think, will work in 50 intervals. So 50 questions, a little break, 50 questions, a break, 50 questions, and so forth. So that's what I think your experience will be like, given what jurisdictions have been discussing. But it is the full UBE exam this time.
And for those of you who are taking California, I can tell you what your breakdown will be. It will be, for California takers, it will be 5 one-hour essays in day 1, and then 1 90-minute performance test. So that will be a longer day. So 5 one-hour essays, day 1, with 15, usually about, 15-minute breaks in between, and then 1 90-minute performance test. The second day will be the 200 questions administered in 4 50-question segments. And so therefore, if other UBE jurisdictions follow similarly, and I'm not saying that they definitely will, because California is not a UBE jurisdiction, to be determined, then they may, and as Brittany said, do the similar thing where it's 4 50-minute segments, 50 question segments the second day. And as Brittany had suggested, perhaps the 6 30-minute essays and then 2 MPTs. But I'm not totally sure if it's going to be the same, but that's how it is for California.
So this, and I think, so we'll talk to the people who've actually taken the exam soon, but I think it goes without saying that this is still a real bar exam, right? And now it's a full bar exam. So even though it's at home and it's on your computer, it should absolutely be treated as the same exam that you were to take in person. It should still average 8 hours of studying per day when you're in December, January, and February. You still want to take breaks between that studying, and you still want to study normally, I guess. I can't stress that enough. It's just because I get questions sometimes from students that are like, it's going to be easier, right? And like, no, it's the same. The location just changes. I just got that question yesterday from a student, and they were like, well, I can work while studying this time because like it's going to be easier. I can take it at home. It's like, well, the rigor of the exam is still there, right? The multiple choice questions are still really hard, and you still have to recall a bunch of essays and take 2 MPTs. So if anything, I think some people, and we'll talk to 2 of them today, they might have found it more challenging to take the test online. So the studying should absolutely 100% be the same. Tanya, I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. All right. So we are lucky, as I said, to have 2 previous test takers here. And I was remiss and I didn't do introductions in the beginning because we were all just jabbing around. But I do want to just say that my name is Tanya Shaw, and I am the owner of LawTutors. And I'm a professor at Western State Law School, that is now Westcliff University. I have to get that right. In California. And Professor Melissa Hale is the director of bar and really important things, Melissa, at Loyola Law School. Is that your official title?
Yes, I request the really important things on the business card. And I'm the Director of Academic Success and Bar Programs at Loyola in Chicago.
Yes, Loyola in Chicago. Professor Brittany Raposa is the Associate Director of Bar Things and also important things at Roger Williams Law School in Rhode Island. And Andres and Deb are our amazing test takers who passed the exam. Deb took Massachusetts and Andres took Illinois. Okay, I can't believe I got those right. No, I do. They are loves of ours. They've worked with LawTutors. We know them from working with us, but they're just amazing people, and we're so excited they agreed to come and talk with us today. So Brittany, do we have prepared questions, or do we want to just have them chat? I think you're on mute, Britt.
Yeah. Okay. That's like a thing. I bought an ornament that says you're on mute, and I put it on my tree because I thought it was funny. I have some questions, and of course you can just kind of talk about whatever you want to talk about freely. But I think I just kind of want to start with, I think what everyone is kind of feeling. They're not experiencing the same thing as you all in terms of they know their bar exams in person, and then all of a sudden everything gets turned upside down, and now they move online. But I feel like the sentiment and feeling might be similar in terms of everyone applying to February was hopeful that it was going to be in person, and now it's online. So could you talk a little bit about what your first feelings and reactions were when you found out that it was moving from an in-person exam to an online exam?
You want to go first, Andre? Or?
No, you first.
So,
Woman first, always.
I think the biggest thing for me was the uncertainty. Just you had studied anticipating, you would be able to use note paper, and you kind of had a process in mind. And for our group, and I don't know, what your experience was like, we weren't getting clear answers. It was always, we're going to figure this out, we'll let you know. So I think that was the biggest piece for me, especially when we learned that we couldn't have a split screen. So the concern was, how are you going to be able to stay on top of the library and write that MPT if you can't see it at the same time that you're writing? And those were my challenges.
So yeah, I guess, so first, hi. I guess my challenges were pretty similar, like uncertainty, but not only for the online exam. It was like, it got canceled twice. I think we were gonna take it in July, and then September, and then October. But when they switched to online, for me, my biggest concern was like if my computer was gonna work and I was gonna have internet. That was probably my biggest concern, because for me, taking the exam online was actually good, because I work with my computer for the last 10, 12 years. I do everything with my computer, so I was happy that I didn't have to do anything in paper. So for me, it was kind of good to move online. The only problem is that you didn't know what was gonna be, and then you hear there were some problems in jurisdiction who took the exam in August. I think it was Michigan or some other jurisdiction, where you hear like horrible stories, like people couldn't take the exam. But after taking it, it was great. Actually, if I had to take it again, and I may take it again, the full UBE, I will prefer to do it online for sure.
You're gonna take it again, Andres? Nice.
Probably, yeah, because I mean, I want to qualify for all jurisdictions that are UBE. So yeah, I may take it again.
Okay. Well, you got
Wow. All the surprises.
and so how did your studying change, if at all, when you found out it was moving online, to prepare for it being online?
I don't really think it did, at least not for me.
It didn't change for me at all, because I took semis, so I was doing everything online. Of course, the multiple choice questions. So actually, it was pretty hard for me when I remember taking probably 2 practice tests on paper, and I was very bad taking them, like reading on a paper and with the bubble sheets and all of that. It took me forever. So I was like, oh, this is not gonna work for me. But then doing on the computer, I didn't really change anything.
Good. So I think now, we want to talk about the stuff everyone wants to know, I think, which is your actual exam experience. And like I said, please feel free to be candid, right? Like if you think something was like really difficult and challenging, it's better for people to know than thinking it's going to be a walk in the park. So we can take it kind of step by step in each component of the exam, and start with the multiple choice, the MBE. So what was it like? So what did it look like, and how did you find it? Was it difficult? Was it challenging? What was difficult about it? So if you could just talk all about that multiple choice portion, what was your experience like?
I think for me, probably the hardest thing was I had traditionally been doing it on paper. So, using some of the study books that I had, and not knowing what to expect. But once I probably did the practice tests, once they put them out there several times, to figure out how to eliminate the questions that I knew were absolutely wrong. And that made it easier for me. And like Andre said, I thought I would prefer to take it online again if I had to.
That's really interesting to hear, because so many students were just like, I cannot take this exam online. I cannot study for it online. So it's really great to hear from both of you. Excuse me. Deb, who's usually traditionally studying on paper, and Andre, even though you were studying online, for both of you to say, I'd rather take it online. See, you guys?
Yeah. So, yeah, the MPT, yeah, I don't know. I mean, so Professor Raposa was my tutor, so she knows how many MPT practice I did, but probably way too many. So the exam wasn't difficult. I didn't think it was difficult, but taking the exam, like actually the way they have the software, I don't know if it's gonna be the same in every jurisdiction, but it's pretty bad. It's not like friendly at all, I would say, like, because they have like two screens that you have the file and the library in one screen, and then you have the screen where you write, and they kind of overlap. So unless your computer has like a very, very big screen, you're not gonna be able to have both at the same time, which means that what I did for myself is like I start practicing writing without seeing what I'm writing. That was the best thing for me, just to get used to, like, to write just without seeing, without looking at the actual stuff that you're writing, just like looking at the file and the library. So, but that was pretty challenging for me. Like probably the hardest one for me in terms of like writing, it was the MPT. Because again, I think they could have done much, much better with the software. And I hope they change some stuff.
What about you, Deborah? How was the MPT for you?
I actually had a different experience. I don't know, if we use the same software or not, but I could either read the file or write on the left side. And on the right side, there was a page for notes. And I could actually pull some of the key pieces from the writings into that note section. And then you were able to copy and paste it into the writing piece when you had that open. So I thought it worked very well for me. I think we probably had two different experiences then.
Okay, that makes sense. And I know it's different for everyone. I know, for example, in California, they will get 8 pieces of physical scratch paper in California, which is double-sided 16. Did UBE jurisdictions have physical scratch paper as well?
Yes, yeah, we had that too.
Yeah, I would say Illinois allowed for a piece of scratch paper, as did I think a lot of the other UBE jurisdictions, because I think that was sort of UBE mandated that there was scratch paper. But and we're going to talk more about this when Britt gets to kind of the how to study portion. But I would actually recommend that you disregard the scratch paper, and I think we're going to talk about why when we get there. Because ultimately, especially after talking to my students who were both successful and some that were unsuccessful on this bar, using the scratch paper seemed to take up a lot of their time.
Yeah.
And you already have limited time. So Bert's going to have some tips on that later on in these slides, but don't think that you have scratch paper. Try to practice without that.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I know in California there are 8 pieces, and they say that means there's 16 because it's double-sided. And so students feel like, okay, great, I have 16 pieces of paper to write on, but it's still a 90-minute exam. And even though, yes, you are supposed to outline and do all of that sort of stuff, right? Then doing it on scratch paper and then translating it back onto the computer is the part that is going to be time consuming. You still, of course, have to outline and do all that work. We're not telling you not to do that. Then the question is, what's the best way to navigate it?
Can I ask our 2 students, or they're not students anymore, they are attorneys. Well, I think they technically need to be sworn in, but they are still all but formally attorneys, I think.
Technicality.
But you both have mentioned that you would prefer, if you had to take the bar again, to have it online. And Tanya found that interesting, and so do I. And I'm just wondering what What makes you think that? What makes it sort of better online? What's the benefit?
So, so for my case, of course, I didn't take the bar before, so I don't know what it is to take the bar in person. So I don't have a comparison, but I did take the MPRE in person. So for me, taking the MPRE was like driving probably 45 minutes very early in the morning, get to a hotel, wait for like probably an hour. I get there an hour and a half earlier, then wait in a very, very big line. Then, because I was one of the first ones to see, then probably I was waiting to start the exam like 2 hours, sitting on a chair, like without anything. And then I took the MPRE. So by the time I finished the MPRE, I think it was already like 5 hours since I get into that building. So that was for me like a bad experience. That wasn't a great experience for me. I didn't have food. I didn't bring food. I don't think I even brought any water. So I took the bar in Loyola, the actual bar I took in Loyola, in a very nice office with a lot of light, extremely quiet. I have everything for me there. I have my food, I have my water. For me, it was just like working. It was another day of work. So for me, it was great. So I will definitely do that again.
And he had a dean of students who provided snacks. Just putting that out there.
I think I kind of feel the same way. I have to take mine in Boston, and I have taken it before. And same thing, if you know Boston traffic, you go in and you pretty much stay in a hotel for 2.5 days to get this done. And you're exhausted before you even get to the site where the exam's being held. And same thing, then it's a good few hours before you actually get into that seat, which is usually feels like it's below freezing in that room and echoes and is noisy. And the format to when you use a computer to write was, for me, totally different than the online one, which was much easier, both in the ability to see what you were writing and to edit. So it was a much better experience for me.
So can you talk a little bit about so I think what most people who I hear from are worried about is the inability to like highlight, underline, write on questions, especially when doing like an essay, underlining important things and writing in the margin, or multiple choice questions, circling certain things. How did you combat that on the different portions of the exam?
I don't know, if mine was different. I had the ability on some pieces to highlight. On the questions I could highlight, but honestly, the highlighting button was a little sticky. So when you went to highlight one word, sometimes you highlighted the whole screen, and I just gave up on that. But I don't know. It seems so much easier. It seems so much easier than looking at the book and going back and forth. And as you said, bubbling it in it just took a lot of extra time.
So for me as an international student, and English is not my first language, as you can imagine. So I didn't really have so much time to like highlighting, taking, like the time is so short for everything. So I couldn't do that. Like I didn't have time to highlight. So I just follow like what I learned basic from LawTutors. I get like how to like do my essays, and I just did that. I didn't highlight. I think in Illinois, you had the ability to like highlight and like, I don't think you could take notes, but you could highlight. But for me, that wasn't like even an option because I didn't have time. And actually, the ME part for me, even though I think I was very, very well prepared, I ran out of time, of course. So without highlighting and without taking any notes or anything. So yeah, that wasn't a very big deal for me, not being able to take notes or to highlight.
So something that both Professor Raposa and I do, usually it's in October, but this year it's in December, is we meet with our students at, Roger Williams or Loyola. We meet with them if they weren't successful. And we try to sort of break down what they did to study, what we can do to help them improve for their next bar, and any kind of problems we can help them fix. And something that I keep hearing from I have a few students who failed by just a teeny, just like a couple points. And a lot of what I'm hearing from them is attempting to do too much highlighting actually wasted too much of their time. And that's not even an online bar thing. I would go as far as to say that happens in in-person years as well. The students that spend too much time trying to mark up the physical piece of paper, they run out of time to actually get points on their essay. And again, I don't want to jump ahead because Britt has slides on this, but we still want you to outline. And that's going to become very clear. You need to outline, but you can do it on the document that you're using instead of trying to work on the highlighting.
Right, absolutely, because they do have virtual scratch paper for the MBE and for UBE it's the MEE, and then for California it's for your essays. And and for the California takers out there, I know that there's a little bit of anxiety because your results don't come out till sometime in mid-January, and the estimate's January 15th. And that's very tough, considering you are also taking the February bar exam. So I just wanted to let you know that for those of you who've come to me and said, for my students, I cannot do an exam at all without physically writing or without physically writing something down. I just want to let you know that there have been many students who have said that to me or to us, but yet have had this experience where they're like, actually, that was better. That saved me time. Don't confuse that with not outlining, right? Don't confuse that with that, because you will have that ability. But sort of this extra time, like I think that Andres was talking about with the highlighting, or Deb was saying, like, would highlight my own screen or bubbling in. Those are the things that actually that you might think that you need, but you don't necessarily. However, of course, the outlining, the stuff like that, you're always going to want to do. But I do know a lot of my students for California are very anxious because they're like, we get the results and then we have a month to study, which I know is a little ludicrous. I think it is ludicrous, but I just want to let you know that it's not going to be like, it's like, oh my God, it's this revolutionary new thing. It will be totally doable, and you might be pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, and I think the kind of last question, and I don't know, people in the audience or whatever might have more, but if you could give people taking the online bar exam in February, like a couple of your biggest pieces of advice for taking it online, what would that advice look like?
Well, I probably have two things to think about. One was I had taken it before and worked with Melissa this time. And one of the biggest pieces I think that I gained from LawTutors was working on the mini essays first, rather than going to the full entire multi-issue essay. And that changed how I focused, and it really helped me. And it helped me with this new format too, to think about it piece by piece and then integrate it differently. And the other piece is you will get those emails from your bar examiner group. And they gave us multiple opportunities to go on and practice using the software with actual essays, actual questions, and an actual MPT. I did that a couple times. The first time was just to get used to the software and how it worked. And the next time, really to think about how to format it differently using the online system. And, at first I thought, okay, I've got to do this. So I'm set up. It's only going to take me 10 minutes. I didn't plan on, giving it 2 or 3 hours. Those hours really helped a lot to understand how to best use this as a tool.
Yep. And thank you, Deborah. And those of you who are in California, I don't think it's an option. I think it's mandatory that you have to take 2 mock exams. In California, you don't have a choice, which is actually a good thing. That you get do that. So if California is doing the same thing this time as they did last time, it is mandatory mock.
Actually, it was mandatory in Illinois too to take a mock exam, which was very good. And actually, if I had to take it again, I will practice even more with those mock exams. I will take it like probably more seriously. I will spend more time because that's kind of, it was, I mean, it was different from my like semis, like the way I practice with semi or the way I practice for myself with the MPTs and MEEs. So it's very good that like I will spend like at least 3, 4, even more hours just like getting familiar with the software and being comfortable, because the last thing you want to have it when the exam comes is something that is new for you, or like, oh my God, I don't remember how to do this, how to go back. For example, I found very, very easy or very nice for me that you could, on the MBE, you could like answer the question, but you could also flag the question. So I know that you flagged for them like to review, but actually I flagged the questions so at the end I could review the questions that I wasn't like 100% sure, or question that I was 50%. So that was very useful for me. I wouldn't have known that if I wouldn't have practiced enough with the software. And like a general advice that I will give is just if you decide to go with LawTutor or whoever you have in like your university, just take advantage of the sources that you have, because that helps a lot. I mean, Professor Hell, which is from Loyola, I took an LLM in Loyola. She was like every week, like offering like tutoring online. And I think barely like 1 or 2 people like pop up on those tutoring. And I think that's pretty bad, because there is a lot of stuff that you learn. I mean, actually, I remember telling my wife like 30 minutes of like a workshop or like talking with somebody who really know, it's worth it like 3 or 4 hours of study. So I will definitely use all the sources, and at least from my experience, don't get too crazy to get all materials that are on the internet, because I end up having so much material, spending so much money, and materials that most of them I never use it, to be honest. Like, so don't get too crazy. I think with semis and LawTutor, it's more than enough in terms of materials.
Thank you, Andres. That's a really, really good point. There is such thing as materials overload. There really is.
That was me.
All right. Well, thanks to both of our students for taking your time today and joining us. And you are welcome to stay on for the rest of our webinar, or if you may not want to spend your Saturday with us, we are happy to have you if you want to chime in or anything like that we do. And you may have tips that you want to add throughout this webinar if you do want to stay on. And we're going to go into, some more tips and things like that for studying. And also just to mention, I know Dad mentioned something called mini essays. It's this little trademark of LawTutors almost, where we've had these things called mini essays. And what she's talking about is practicing when it's overwhelming to practice with long essays. We have these little, essentially, mini essays. And it's a way to practice your essay taking by subtopics, right? Like, okay, you're in torts, do you want to just practice intentional torts or battery or something like that? It's also a way of sort of simultaneously practicing your multiple choice and essay writing at the same time. So you're sort of killing 2 birds with 1 stone. It's a favorite of our students. So if you ever run into a LawTutor student or talk to a LawTutor student, that is one of the things that they seem to love. I mean, they won't necessarily do it just for fun if they're not taking a bar, or they might.
You mean people don't just do certain things
they're
for
not
fun?
us. I know.
No, with the mini essays, students that have had me for bar classes, like for credit bar classes, one thing I make them do is when I give out quizzes or midterms, their follow-up to the quiz or midterm is often to take a few of the multiple choice questions that they got wrong and turn it into a mini essay. Because like Tanya said, that's helping them with the essay writing. And as Deb mentioned, it's a good way to start and not be overwhelmed by the large essay. And it helps you work on things like focus and timing, but it also helps you remember the law. Again, I don't want to get too ahead in the tips, but a lot of you guys start to focus on, I need to memorize all these things. And you're going to be more likely to recall the law if you use it. So if you get an MBE question wrong on hearsay, and you're like, oh, I've got to go review my notes on hearsay. No, turn the MBE question into a mini essay, and you're more likely to remember that rule.
Absolutely. And I know this is going to sound really weird, but I did have a dream. Of course, everything is about bar. And a student came to me in this dream and said, look, and she had like 10 pages of mnemonics. And she's like, I'm ready. I have all these mnemonics. And it kind of goes with what Melissa says. And it's sort of like, oh my gosh, like memorizing all of these little things aren't necessarily what's going to get you to do well on the exam, right? Because remember, that's a step is memorizing. And then the next step is you have to understand it and apply it. And so just to go off of what Melissa said, the other reason for doing multiple choice and maybe writing them out as mini essays, and we're going to say this time and time again, but when you take a multiple choice question, you should have the answer before you go to the answer choices, right? It all is possible, unless it says like which one of the following are, then you can't. But you should have that answer in your head before you go to the answer choices. And that's another reason why we really emphasize writing out some of these things, because you don't want to be like, I have no idea, so I will look to the answer choices for my answers. You don't want to do that. You want to have that in your head beforehand. So that's another reason by saying, okay, I'm going to look at this and I'm just going to write out my answer before looking at the answer choices when possible. All right, so now let's talk about some tips. Look at this person right here. It looks like me. Burnout right there. So let's talk a little about burnout. Brittany's actually, let me just tell you something about Brittany. Brittany is really good at sort of talking about this because she's always warning Professor Hale and I about this. And she actually, I don't know, this is a hint, but she's scheduled with us a mandatory Zoom with Professor Hale and I to do a self-care for the holidays Zoom. So she's the best person to probably talk about this and how to sort of take care of yourself.
Well, like, do as I say, not as I do, but that's what I always say.
Great talents. She's got a multiple talents. So she's able to do a lot of great things.
So one of the things that I think can be difficult, if taking it first time, second time, third, doesn't really matter, is the risk of burnout. So I think that one of the things that I just always tell people to keep in mind is the signs of burnout, I guess. And so to me, that's like, one, well, if you're feeling like you literally just can't not cry, that means you're likely burnt out. That's how I know anyway. Or if I just like need to pull my hair out or something like that, or scream. Like last week, I just went outside and screamed at the top of my lungs. I just like, sometimes we need that. That's how you know. One thing too is that if you have to read something over and over and over and over again to even comprehend what it's saying, that means it's time to like close up the books, get some rest, and pick it up another day. So the next day is always a new day. And so the studying that you do that's ineffective when you're exhausted is not going to be good studying. It's likely not adding anything and it's not effective for you. Then if you're like doing okay, and all of a sudden it's like 7:00 p.m. or 8:00 at night and you do a multiple choice set and you get like 2 right, that's probably means it's time to just close up shop, right? Just pick it up tomorrow or the next day, and don't worry about keeping on going when you're just going to discourage yourself and get really and be exhausted. So those are the signs of burnout to me, and that's when you know it's time to step away.
One thing I wanted to add, and Brittany and I actually spoke about this a little bit yesterday, is that burnout can also manifest. There can be physical manifestations of burnout if you're sort of this idea that you don't get burned out, which sometimes I think is true for me, and then my body will absolutely revolt. And one of the things Brittany and I were talking about is like the headache, right? If you start getting massive headaches, whether it be behind your eyes or what we call tension headaches, even if you're like, I'm fine, I can work through it, that is a sign that you are stressed or burnt out. Or if you're me, I'm not going to tell you all the strange ways things physical manifest. I get hives everywhere, and I break out in hives, or the strangest things happen because I'm convinced that I'm totally fine, and my body will revolt. So anything weird happening, headaches, stomach aches. I think I was actually nauseous during the entire time I was studying for the bar, and I didn't understand why. I think every day I thought I just ate something bad, and that wasn't the case. And so also pay attention to physical manifestations.
And you can't work, there's a temptation, I feel like, if you're the type of person who is a law student who's taking the bar, there's a temptation to think that we have to work through those physical manifestations. And trust us, the three of us on this panel do it even now, even though we know better. Like Britt said, do as we say, not as we do. I had a student once who was a first year, wasn't doing well academically, and so I called them in, and it turned out they had recently been diagnosed with migraines and had sort of been working through those migraines, but you can't. And I knew this, and I told the student this because I get frequent migraines, and I have for over a decade. And I said, you can't work through that. You're not retaining any information. And in fact, you're making the migraine worse, and you're missing the information that you would otherwise need. It's not effective studying. So that student listened to me and did better the next semester. But literally 2 days after I had this talk with the student, I was trying to work through a migraine. And my dean of students, the same one that brought students snacks on bar day, popped into my office and was like, are you going to practice what you preach? And I'm like, no, I'm fine. And she was like, okay, get in my car, I'm driving you home. So sometimes it also helps to have accountability partners or people that, even if you're not studying with, that just know you and you can chat with. Tanya, Britt, and I do this to each other
Every day.
and remind each other
Yeah.
to take that step back and not work through a migraine or not work through hives or these other things that are only going to get worse, and you're not really studying.
Yeah, and there you can do as we say for that one thing, and we're not just Melissa, Brittany, and I are all in a group text, and I think if one of us don't text the other one, we just assume something catastrophic has happened if there's a day that goes by. But we are each other's accountability partners too, because we will also, in our effort to make sure that you guys are taken care of, that everything is running smoothly, that our students are happy, sometimes we can experience burnout too, or we don't know. I'll be like, I have hives all over my body for no reason, and they're like, okay, time to take a step back. So it is really good if there's your loved ones, people who understand you, things like that, even if they don't understand you, to have people, that you can say, hey, I'm feeling this. I'm thinking this, I'm doing that. I think that's super, super important, no matter how independent you are, like some people on this panel who are not to be mentioned, who are extremely independent. It's really good to still just like check in with each other. All right. Customizing your schedule. Brittany is a customizing expert, but we all believe in sort of customizing schedules, and that is can happen in different ways, right? If you're taking a commercial bar prep course, or if you're taking a course where it's more one-on-one experience, like you're taking something like LawTutors where you're working with a tutor, or you're creating your own schedule from scratch, depending if you've taken the exam again and you've taken a bar prep course in the past, but now you're doing it from scratch. That's going to be really important to do, right? And if you break this down, and this is just goes for all of us. I mean, I know that some of us are better at breaking things down incrementally than others. Brittany always reminds me to break things down. She's like, did you break things down like we talked about? I'll be like, no, well, you have to break things down. And that she's absolutely correct. You do. Whether you do it kicking and screaming like me, or it comes to you naturally, you will feel better either way. So it will not only seem less intimidating, it will be less intimidating. And also it is a necessity, right? That you do have a schedule, because doesn't matter how smart you are, if you have a photographic memory, if all of these things, none of that actually matters for the bar exam because of the sheer amount of material that you have to work with. Brittany, did you want to add some additional things about scheduling?
Yeah, the only thing I think I would add is that I always give this spiel usually about creating your own schedule, because I think that it's important to make your own schedule and not just blindly follow what your bar course tells you to do. Like those schedules like are a one size fits all approach to bar prep, and you're not everybody else. So I think that it's important that you fit in time for your strengths and weaknesses. So like if you're in week 3 and you're tanking property, I use property because like everybody hates it, but I like it, but whatever. And
she likes some procedure.
If you're tanking property and your course doesn't tell you to do any property, you know that you have to fit that into your schedule to increase your weak areas. So you constantly have to build that in. Another thing I think to always build in is memorization. Well, I don't know if it's a fault, but your bar programs don't tell you to go memorize stuff, right? So you have to do that. And so you want to build that in for your own schedule throughout the course of bar prep. I think a mistake a lot of students make is they wait until like the week or two before to start memorizing everything. And then that's cramming and it's putting it into your short-term memory, and recall isn't going to be as good as if you started memorizing throughout your entirety of bar prep. So I think that making your own schedule, using the schedule your bar company makes for you while also incorporating and adapting and changing things to what you personally need to do is definitely the best way to approach bar study.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't emphasize enough what Brittany said is that we're not one size fits all, right? You as a student are not. And one of the things that sometimes I believe needs to catch up a little bit, and I think that some companies are doing this, is the traditional bar study schedule that would work for all people don't anymore, because we have such a diverse array of students taking the bar in terms of second careers, second languages, working full time, families. One of my favorite students, she has 6 kids, and she's an awesome student. She has 6 kids. She works full time. Her husband works full time. This schedule traditional Barbara schedule will not work for her the same way, which does not mean she can't nail that exam, because she is awesome. She's a great student. It just has to be different for her. And I think that that's just important it's okay.
And even if you don't have kids, which by the way, I am not a parent, but I have heard that it is frowned upon to just ignore your kids for 2.5 months while you study. So you probably need to take that into account if you're a parent. But we lost Andres for daddy time, so you can see how that works. But I would say that even if you don't have children, everybody has different unique life circumstances. And so, for example, I am not a morning person at all. I am more apt to get things done at 1 a.m. than at 8 a.m. And so that I might factor that into my customized schedule. Keeping in mind that you do have to take the bar at a certain time. So if you're always practicing your essays at 2 a.m., it might be hard to then write one during the time of the bar, but you can still customize by knowing yourself, know when you're going to be most effective, know when you are going to get the most done. I would also suggest that you get very specific with your schedule. Britt mentioned breaking it down, and Tanya said Brittany's always reminding her, break these tasks down. If you just say, I'm going to study from 10 a.m. to noon, well, what does that mean? Like, assign yourself specific tasks. And last but not least on the schedule, we're going to give you some tips in a couple slides, like some concrete study tips. Don't look at checking things off as a magic way to pass the bar. Meaning if your schedule has to change as you go, if you're feeling like you're a little bit behind, there is no magic like, I've got to get these 10 things done and then I can pass the bar. And we know you guys know that logically, but I see so many students get caught up in the idea that they are behind. And yes, you need to work and it is hard work, but there's just no magic list of things you need to check off before you pass the bar.
Absolutely. As long as I've known Melissa, which is a very, very long time, that is one of the things that she has been saying, which is, you know, this sort of weird psychological rush to get through a priority list, right? Or a task list and check everything off. It does feel good. But if you're just doing it for the sake of checking those boxes and not actually saying, okay, what is this, the quality of my studying over the quantity of it, it's not going to serve you well. And so now let's get a little bit into the specifics. I know we've told you, okay, make a schedule. What does that mean, right? And what does that mean specifically about maximizing your success for the online bar exam? And I'll turn it over to Brittany as well about talking about these specific items of these particular tasks that you can do.
Yeah, so I think that these are a lot of these I think were touched on when we were talking about making a schedule, but this is just what should be considered when you're making one. What I mean by make a list and prioritize it is just make a list of what you need to work on, what are your weak areas, what is more important for you to work on than something else, and you'll know that based on what your performance in that area is. Melissa talked about this, consider your best working hours. And it's funny because I typically scold students who don't study in the morning, but like not to be mean. I do so because not that I frown upon, and everybody's different, but I frown upon people waking up at like noon every day and then picking up the study because you have to take this exam at like 8 a.m. 9 a.m. So you got to get ready to do it. But consider your best working hours in terms of when do you best memorize? Like when does your brain work the best? If you do have work or you do have other obligations, what time is best for you to work then in light of those obligations? Turn your weaknesses into strengths. So every weakness you have, you want to fit into your schedule to work towards turning it into a strength. So if you hate civil procedure, your scores are really low, you should be incorporating civil procedure into your schedule. Another thing that I think is really important about making a schedule is find something that you can stick to. Don't make an unrealistic schedule. So like, don't put 15 things on your task list for that day when it was absolutely impossible to achieve those 15 things in the first place, right? Make sure it's realistic. If you have time at the end of the day to do something else, awesome. But what doesn't feel good and what can hurt bar study morale is making a checklist to do that's impossible and then feeling like you weren't accomplished. So you want to make sure you're doing everything realistic. Consider the amount of time the tasks take on your schedule, and don't overload your schedule.
And one of the things that can actually be kind of fun, and I know you know, I do this and stuff like that, is finding with whether you like to do these types of things online or you actually physically write it down, find a good methodology of doing your schedule. In sense, like for example, I'll just throw out some examples. The Panda Planner, right? The Panda Planner out there, it has like, for example, what blocks of time, things that you've accomplished that day, things that you're proud of, things like that. It's sort of this whole thing. Or if you like to do things online, a good schedule. Or another one is the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People schedule, where you actually can block out your time, but it also says like, you know, daily goals, gratitude, things like that. So depending on what kind of person you are, it is nice to sort of, I have a small one, but I also have a large one, which is purple, which Melissa will love. And I stole it from my dad. He got the purple one, which, no, I get it. But, you know, I tend to have planners that also kind of just like, what is your overall goal? What am I happy that I accomplished? What do I want to do for next week? Also ones that have weekly goals and things like that. It depends on you, right? You might be the type of person who wants to do this right in your phone, right online. But find a schedule, and it sounds really strange, that makes you feel good. That's like, hey, I like this schedule. This doesn't seem like a chore. That's like, I look forward to saying, what are my goals today? I look forward to saying what I'm happy about that I accomplished. I look forward to doing my daily and my weekly schedules, because doing the schedule in and of itself can feel like a sense of accomplishment. And so don't look at it so much as a chore, as like, okay, this is something I can do. But realism is very, very important. And sometimes the reason why it's important to start early is because you also have to collect data about yourself, right? About what is realistic, because sometimes we don't always know. I mean, I'm not as young as I used to be, as shocking as that is. And the things that I could get done, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, are not the things that I can get done now. I mean, girl needs a nap sometimes, I mean, I cannot stay up really late and things like that. So also the reason to start scheduling early is to collect data and say, okay, I totally thought that this would take this much time, but it took this much time. So start scheduling things out and then start doing them and see if you have to modify that schedule.
Can a note on that? I absolutely agree with Brittany, by the way, about, you have to sometimes study in the morning, and that is, there's a balance to be had, right? Like, I do know I'm a night owl. I do know my brain doesn't like to work before 10 or 11 a.m. I ended up with a 9 a.m. class this past semester, and I was like, oh no, that's gonna not end well for me. So that's knowing yourself and knowing when you're most productive, but also knowing, like Brittany said, the bar doesn't care about your rhythms. What the bar cares about is that you're in that seat at probably 9 a.m., depending on your jurisdiction, but probably 9 a.m., and that you're starting to write. And if that's not something that is normally when you're at your best, even if you start by doing 1 or 2 days a week where you're writing by 9 a.m., you're going to start to train yourself to do that a little bit better. And like Tanya said about the lists, I cannot stress enough how often I go into the weekend and I'm like, I have no Zoom calls for 2 days. This is all the stuff I'm going to accomplish. I've got this really long list. And then Sunday night rolls around and I'm like, oh, that didn't happen. And it can feel really defeating. Yeah, it feels really frustrating if you don't get that down. So be realistic about what you can accomplish, and if something takes you a little bit longer, like Brittany said with the quality over the quantity, it's okay if it takes you longer. There's no magic list.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And now, that we've talked about things that you should do, let's talk about some things that we've all learned from our students, from teaching, from doing all of this. What are some classic studying mistakes? And this is going to be really important to talk about, just as much as it is talk about what to do, is to talk about what not to do, right? And because you can learn equally from both of them. So I'll let either of you sort of start with this, because I like to talk a lot. Melissa?
Well, I'm going to start in the middle and then let Britt go back. Learning the buzzwords, but not the underlying substance. And what I would add to that is memorize without understanding. So yeah. Brittany said that a common mistake students make is to not memorize soon enough and to leave that to the very end. And because a Barbary or a Themis doesn't typically put in memorization into their schedule, students never get to the memorization part. I would go one step further and say, learn the difference between sort of basic rote memorization and understanding. Brittany mentioned that if you wait until the very end to memorize, things only go into your short-term memory. So if you're just memorizing at a surface level right now, you're not going to remember that stuff because that's short-term memory. And what's really important is, yes, you have to learn the buzzwords. Yes, you need to memorize elements, but you need to understand what they mean. And I know that seems obvious to a lot of you, but Tanya and I once had a student, this was a really, really long time ago. This student took the bar many, many times. I won't say how many, but it was many, many, many double-digit times. And it turned out that the student was memorizing, like literally had the federal rules of evidence memorized. And I'm not exaggerating that. The student could be like, well, FRE 804.2 section A, B says, and I'm like, but that's not helping you. That's not helping you answer a question, because you have this memorized and you know exactly what it says, but you don't know how to apply it to a unique fact pattern. And guess what? When you understand the elements of, let's say, battery, instead of merely memorizing them, you're going to remember. So I like telling my students there's a difference between recall or remembering and just rote memorization. And there are going to be some things that you need to just memorize, and that might happen the week before the bar. But 90% of the material needs to be understood and needs to be it needs to be something you recall and not just memorize the words in a way that you can't apply them in a useful manner.
Yeah, think about hearsay. We've all know the definition of hearsay, okay? That does not mean we all understand it, right? An out-of-court statement made by a declarant that goes to the truth of the matter asserted. You got that, right? You could say that. What do each of those things mean, right? Or the rule against perpetuities, right? We can recite those, but does that still mean that we can apply it? So you can see the big difference between the memorization of the rules and the understanding of the rules, but they're not mutually exclusive, right? When you understand the rules, you're going to have them memorized too, and you're going to remember them better. And if you just memorize the rules, it's not going to serve you. And sometimes yes, it's just, okay, you have to always know that negligence is duty, breach, causation, damages. And if you write that down, obviously, if you don't write that down, we're going to have a problem. But that's not enough, right? That's not enough. Brittany, do you want to add some things about some mistakes that you have on that list?
Yeah, so I think, and this is just kind of things that I see often, not actually timing yourself and doing things. So not timing your multiple choice, not timing essay writing, not timing MPTs. That in turn results in low MPT and essay scores, and not only for the sake of not having practice, but then just really not good with time management because you never practice time management. So I think that's something big. And what I see a lot of is like, well, I outlined the essay, but I just didn't write it out. And so you need a balance, right? You do need to be able to practice a lot as well in a simulated setting. Another thing I think I see a lot of is letting weak areas stay weak or not giving them enough attention as you should, so you don't incorporate that into your study. You're just like really complacent with your study and don't really take ownership and control over it. So if, for example, you're struggling with real property, but you don't give it more time than some other subjects, then you're just letting your weak area stay weak, and it's not going to then translate to a good bar exam score. Or if your multiple choice scores are pretty consistently low throughout studying for the exam, and you don't incorporate more MBE questions into that study or change the way you're studying with them, then your score is not going to go up. It just will plateau. So that's kind of, those are two I think of the biggest mistakes that I think I see people make. And then probably the last one, it's very broad. Not reviewing your work is very broad, but self-assessment is so important. And so it's not good enough to say, hey, you tell me how I'm doing,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
That's one thing, but self-assessing yourself, that creates such a better writer and a better multiple choice question taker. So if you can self-assess yourself, figure out what you're doing wrong, or figure out what you can do better constantly, always self-assess how you do after everything you do. How did I do after this multiple choice set? What can I do to increase this score? Or how did I do on this essay? What do I need to do in the future? Or how did I do on this MPT? What did I do well? What didn't I do well? And what do I need to incorporate into my next MPT? That makes scores increase and performance increase. And so we no longer will see that plateau if you do all of that self-assessment.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And Brittany, you and I had a conversation about this yesterday about self-assessment as well. And some students are just like, I just need someone to grade all my essays, which is important. Sure, you want someone to give you feedback, but if you take that and you're just like, oh, okay, so you just said I have to, and if you don't actually translate that into a deep dive self-assessment, you're going to make the same mistakes. If you're like, okay, so basically what you just said, I have to spot more issues, or like, oh, so I basically got all the issues, I just had to say more words. Like you have got to be like, all right, what is the difference? And then when you're hung up, right, a little bit on that self-assessment and say, this is what I'm getting out of this, but I just need some help. Then you ask for help. But really, a lot of that work needs to be done up front, right? And it's not just because we don't want to grade your hundreds of essays, which is also part of the thing, but that you also want to be able to do that work so that you're not just sort of like, okay, look at this. All right, did I get a 6 out of 6 or did I get a 1 out of 6? Okay, shoot, I got a 1 out of 6. So I'm just going to do it again. Tell me what to do, right? Because we're not going to take the exam for you as many times as we've been asked by students. We're
also
not
unethical.
Yeah,
it becomes an MPRE problem.
It does.
Well.
We can't do that, and we won't. So self-assessment is an extraordinarily important part of this.
And would you guys say even on the MBE, because Tanya mentioned the essays and how you have to kind of self-grade the essays, but with the multiple choice, it's so tempting to say, well, the assessment is that A was the right answer.
Yeah.
But you really need to often dive in and to say, why didn't I pick A? Was it reading comprehension? What did I misread something? Did I not know or understand the law? Why did I think C was a better answer? And really assess there. I also want to just echo Brittany's outlining essays. All three of us, I think, before I started working full-time in academia, I worked with Tanya, and we primarily did work with repeat takers. Not all, but there was a lot of repeat takers. And one of the first things I would notice about students when I kind of talked to them about what they had studied, how they had studied in the past, is that they were either reading essays and kind of just trying to, by osmosis, soak in whatever they were supposed to say, or they were outlining them. And by outlining them, I mean, they were kind of like, I'm going to circle an issue and I'm going to write this down. And the thing is, I have rarely, I've been working with bar students now, this is going to date me a little bit, but I've been working with bar students now for 14 years. And Tanya, even longer.
I know. I knew she was going to say that.
And I can tell you that it is very rare that I work with a repeat taker who didn't know the law. It happens, but it is very, very rare that someone failed the bar because they did not know the law. Usually they did something like outline all the essays, and now they don't know how to put that into an essay in 30 minutes. They don't know how to, they wrote out all the law that was applicable for that essay. So they remembered the law, but they don't know what to do with it. They don't know how to analyze. And that is, if there is one thing I see that leads to bar exam failure, it is usually that.
Absolutely. And then I just have and Brittany, when you talk about soaking up the material versus diving in, I'm assuming you're talking about the same thing where you're just really like reading all of it and you're memorizing it, but you're not doing anything with it is what then that's a great way of putting it. Practicing. All right. So as you heard, and I was very pleasantly surprised to hear from our panelists who we know very well, by the way. They've been our students. We've known them both in the academic, in school, out as students of LawTutors, that they enjoyed taking the exam. I mean, enjoyed might be a strong word. They preferred taking the exam online. Right. And you have somebody who was on the panel who admitted that she had taken it before and she had done, she was used to the writing and the traditional way of taking it, and that this she actually preferred. So then the practice shouldn't be as daunting then, but we do want to practice as if we are taking the exam online, which doesn't mean that you cannot practice with pen and paper, but the bulk of your practice should be the actual simulation of that exam, which is doing your MPTs on the screen, practicing your MEEs, and practicing your MBEs. And I think that Brittany or Melissa can dive a little bit more specifically into what that looks like. I know, Brittany, you've done a lot of articles and a lot of talks about practicing and physically what that sort of is.
Yeah, I think that, I also don't want to tell anyone that they can't use their books, because you can. I would just do a lot of the practice on the screen. If you do use questions in a book, I would just try to make it so that way it's on a screen. Don't get used to like underlining it, writing on the side of it. Just don't do that stuff. So just limit yourself to answering the question to test yourself. But I do think like looking at a screen is different than looking at a piece of paper. So you need to get your eyes adjusted to all of that. And it's definitely important to simulate the practice on the screen. So I personally think any practice exam that you do should be on the screen, because that's going to be your experience on the bar. So like if you're going to take a full simulated bar or a 200 MBE or a 100 MBE simulation or a simulated MPT, I think it should always be on the screen. When you use your books, I think that could be for just some extra practice questions that you're doing, but any simulation, I think it should be on the screen.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Melissa.
I was gonna say that's any activity, right? You want to simulate the practice as close as it is to be as why can't I speak? You want to simulate the practice and make it like game day as close as possible. So anything you ever train for, whether it's a sport, whether it's an exam, you try to practice like you will on game day. At least Tanya and I have danced in the past. We have past lives as a ballerina and a tapper. And you have dress rehearsals for a reason. You have rehearsals where you practice on that stage and you practice with the lighting and the costumes, because you don't want your first time to be at the performance. And similarly, if we were having an in-person bar exam, I encourage my students to use a Scantron and a pencil and fill in the bubbles, because they might not have done that in a while. So now I'm going to do the reverse, and I'm going to encourage all my students to do as much as they possibly can on screen.
Yeah, and for some really good sort of pictorial representations and details about this, Brittany has written some fantastic articles with actual graphics in them. And so they're posted on the lawtutors.net/articles or lawtutors.com. We both have, either of them will work. And in those articles, she has specifically written about practicing the MBE online, practicing the MPT online with actual pictures on them. So if you want a little bit more detail about what is the best way to practice them, I really suggest looking at some of her how-to, articles isn't even the name for them, her sort of how-to guides that we have there for you. All right, so changing gears every so often, and it's really interesting. My mom reminds me of this all the time. She's like, I see you sitting there at 8 in the morning and 8 o'clock at night, and you're doing the exact same thing. And it's true, and I sometimes don't even change my position, which explains a tremendous amount of my back problems. But it's not just about changing your actual physical position, but change up what you're doing, because your brain will stop being as sharp as it's supposed to be if you're not constantly entertaining it with different things, right? And so we want to keep you can't just say, keep your attention. It's hilarious. My mom's like, if you stress out, don't stress out. Okay, well, that's easier said than done. She has that better mentality than I do about that. She's like, when I'm stressed, I just don't stress. Well, okay, that works for some people, but, or pay attention, but there are actual physical ways to help us pay attention if some of us are not natural at it, right? So, switch up what you're spending time on, right? If you write a full-time essay, you need to do that. Take a break and stretch, things that I don't do. I even invested, in some really good like stretching videos, yoga mats that are like right there that I need to start doing some more. And it really does help when you actually do it. Review the essay and the sample essay. This is an example. Look up the law that you missed, very important. Read and understand the law. Write the law that you missed into your outline. Take the rules for the topics you missed, see if they make sense, not just like, okay, this is what intent is. I see it on my paper. Explain them to yourself. If people see you talking to yourself, just explain to them that's what you're going to be doing for a few months. Take a break and do some MBE questions on that subject. I am also going to talk a little bit about the practice. What Brittany said is super important about taking full-time essays. There is stuff that it does not mean that every essay you practice with needs to be full-time, because there's going to be a bit of buildup, right? And so when you are doing in some beginning, you don't want to wait. This is one thing I don't want to happen. You don't want to wait to take a full-time essay when you're like, I need to wait to memorize all the law until I do an essay, which happens with a lot of students, and then they don't do essays, right? Because they've never memorized all the law, because you know what? You're never going to memorize all the law, and you don't have to. But you do have to start practicing. So if you don't want to dive right into taking full-time essays, like, you know, week 1, week 2, that does not mean you shouldn't be doing essays, right? And in the doing of the essays, you can break up some of your time into, like, I'm going to do practice essays while I use my notes and I practice writing right law, things like that. And then you have to balance that with doing timed essays as well. But we don't want you to say, yeah, I'll do timed essays once I know everything about torts. That's not what we want you to do. We want you to be practicing writing the entire time that you are actually studying. Anyone have anything to add on that?
Just the idea of changing gears every so often, it's not even if you're feeling like you need a change of pace. I have some students that really kind of get into their groove. They're like, I'm in an essay group. I want to do nothing but essays today. And that's fine once in a while, but honestly, your brain is more likely to remember and process information if you change up what you're doing. I look at it as sort of, not that I am a workout expert by any stretch of the imagination, especially if you could see me in like full body. But the idea is, like, if you just always spend a half hour on the treadmill and that's your workout, and you don't change the speed or the incline, or you don't change the exercise you're doing, your muscles aren't working as hard. If you switch from multiple choice to essay, to looking up a law, to reviewing an essay, your brain is working harder and more likely to remember things. So even if you feel good about, I'm going to do nothing but essays today, consider changing it up a little bit so that you're more likely to remember the information that you're working on.
Absolutely. Switching gears, very important. All right. Look at this little strong muscle. Is this a brain or a muscle?
A brain.
Sure. Yeah, it's a brain. I like it. Yeah, see, I should know what a brain looks like.
Your brain is a muscle.
Okay, yeah, these are good reasons I went to law school. I apparently don't know any anatomy whatsoever. So train yourself to be physically strong. Bar taker online, Brittany.
Yeah, I think this speaks to, like, earlier when I said, like, try not to wake up at noon every day. Melissa, just kidding. You want to wake up early enough to start studying so you can train yourself to be ready to take such a rigorous exam at that time of the day. Also, stamina is really important. So, like, I usually tell people, especially now that the whole UBE is online, it's really important to try to study in 3-hour increments. So, I don't know, 9 to 12. I had to do the math because it's like, yikes. 9 to 12, then take a break, then like 1 to 4, take a break, and then maybe a couple hours after that. So, because what you don't want to do is just not get your body and your mind ready to be in such a rigorous environment for 3 hours at a time. And then you burn out midway through a 100 question set, or midway through a multiple choice set, or you can't even write your final essay because you're so burnt out. I think that's really, really important. So you want to study in the same environment and like you would be taking the exam.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. Melissa, do you have anything to add to that?
Just that I cannot stress enough Brittany's comment about kind of training yourself in those 3-hour blocks. One of the things that I typically do in March, and I'm going to have to do it online this March, although I don't think it has quite the same impact, is I create an opportunity in March for my students to do a diagnostic MBE, but it's only 100 questions, so it's not even the full 200. It's sit here for 3 hours and do 100 questions. And they always leave amazed at how hard it was, not the law. So when they leave the room, they're not telling me like, oh, those questions were so hard, Professor Hale. They're like, oh my God, that was hard to sit there for 3 hours. Because even if you're used to sitting in a class for 3 hours, there's usually something to break up the monotony. There's usually some kind of interaction. And you just don't have that on the bar. So it's daunting, and do not underestimate the stamina you're going to need to do 100 questions or 6 essays in 3 hours.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this part right here is important. You might be tempted to watch Christmas movies and things like that while you're studying. Some of us are more tempted than others. But you can't do that. You know, it doesn't mean you can't watch Christmas movies at all, or Hanukkah movies, or any movie that you want. It just means that you can't do it when you're actively studying. All right. So we do want to give you a few tips about answering the actual questions online, and very important about sort of screen practice and how to do that. And you got some tips from our students about doing this, and I'm going to leave this to either Brittany or Melissa to kind of expand a little bit more.
Yeah, so I think, and this is just kind of to wrap up kind of each portion of the exam for tips. So make sure you practice them on the screen. If you're going to use virtual scrap paper, maybe do so just to issue spot, type the issue quickly so that way you don't forget it. And this is me personally, and everyone's different, but I feel like when I read on the screen, I read much faster than when I'm reading on a piece of paper. I have a tendency to like gloss over things and skim when it's on the screen, more so than when it's on a piece of paper. So make sure you slow down, you're reading really carefully. You'll know this in your practice if you're reading too quickly, because you'll be missing issues or you'll be missing key facts because you'll know, well, I read that question too fast. Make sure you follow a strategy for taking MBE questions online. So mine is read the call of the question first, then read the fact pattern carefully, try to pick out what the specific legal issue is in that fact pattern, analyze the question, and then pick the answer that most closely associates with that answer that you've gotten. I say to do that even before looking at the answer choices, so that way you're not so bogged down in the answer choices and you're not easily tricked by a red herring answer choice, which almost every question is going to contain. And then I think some of the biggest techniques for increasing your MBE score is not just doing them and then looking at the answer and then moving on, but the biggest thing is you want to make sure that you are writing down and tracking your progress constantly. So writing down why you're wrong, writing down rules you're missing, right? And then kind of isolating areas where your scores are low. So like, for example, if evidence is giving you a hard time and it's hearsay and relevancy that are bringing you down, isolate those areas and practice MBE questions in those areas. Try to beef up that score by isolating weak areas, focusing on them to increase your performance in those areas. Tanya, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Ooh, I love the purple. Okay. Tips for answering essay questions online. So of course it's very similar, but here we are doing the full essay as opposed to the MBE questions. Screen practice, same thing, right? Looking at those essays online, which doesn't mean you can't practice any essays from a book. Noting the key facts or issue spotting, and whether that is quickly jotting them down, putting it on your virtual scratch paper, or highlighting it, though sometimes highlighting isn't going to always serve us, because we don't know unless you might have different color highlight colors thought of ahead of time for facts or issues or stuff like that, but you want to actually physically note them. You outline, and you do have virtual scratch paper to outline your answer on. And depending on the jurisdiction, you can take that from your outline or put it right into your answer itself. And then I'm going to have a little bit about Brittany or Melissa talk about specific MEE test taking strategies and increasing essay performance.
So my thing is on the next slide. So I don't know if Brittany wants to say anything first before we go on to that slide, or no? Okay, so most of, I mean, we can't guarantee that it's going to look identical to this, right? The jurisdictions are a little bit different, and also, the software is not identical, but basically you're getting the question, your answer space, and virtual scratch paper. And like Tanya mentioned, some jurisdictions will allow you to copy and paste in between the three. And this is where practicing comes in. When it gives you the opportunity to practice with the software, you can play around and figure out if you do have that option. What I would suggest, although this is just my suggestion, is to forego the scratch paper entirely and outline in your answer space. So if I'm reading the torts question, on what theory or theories, if any, can Paul recover damages from, and what defenses may be reasonably by? And so we look at transco as the first one. So in my outline in the answer space, I'm going to put my heading 1, because you always want to, I realize you can't see my mouse. Tanya, I don't know if you can mouse over the 1 and 2. If the answer choice sets up a situation like this, you absolutely have to follow that 1 and 2. So in my answer space, I'm going to set up 1 and transco, and then I'm going to write what the issue is. And then I'm going to write the rule, and I'm going to outline this for myself so that by the time I'm done outlining, the writing of the essay is actually just putting it together. So it's an actual paragraph essay that has a strong analysis. If I use my scratch paper, if I can copy and paste, that's great, but that's still that's still a step that I don't necessarily need to take in a 30-minute exam. Again, everybody's a little bit different. Practice what works for you. That is just my 2 cents, that it's just easier to outline in the answer space and then turn that outline into an actual essay.
Okay, so Brittany is our performance test queen, and some people get very, very nervous about the performance test because there's such a large amount of information with this file in this library. And so when we talk about really breaking down that information, I will turn this over to Brittany.
Yeah, so I think the students that were here gave some good tips about the MPT on the screen and what it looks like. And so I think you kind of have a backdrop about that. I recommend not using scratch paper for the MPT because you simply just, in my opinion, don't have time to. So I think you should just be outlining and already beginning to write in your exam document that you're going to submit to the examiners. And so instead of writing down an outline and instead of then transcribing that outline into a document, I think the outline should just be already in the document that you're going to submit. You should, for example, try to write rule statements as you read them in the MPT, so that way you're writing and outlining simultaneously. And you want to plan your answer within the document, which is really, really, really important. So you might need to get used to not being able to see what you type while you're typing it because of the layout and format of the MPT. So you want to be comfortable with that ability to do that. So when you're practicing, maybe start practicing in that way. You also, and this is probably what I'm going to stress the most, I think that if it's your first time taking the exam, or even if it's your second time, we all get the urge, I think, to not practice the MPT because we don't have to memorize anything for it. It's that part of the bar exam that seems easy because the rules are in front of you and you just have to produce a document. But I can't stress that practicing it is important regardless. But now that it's on the screen, it's a completely different task. And you need to, I suggest practicing 10 to 12 MPTs simulated prior to sitting for the bar. And I think that some people are like, that's so many, especially given that they're 90 minutes each. But I think even more than that could be necessary, but at a minimum, 10 to 15 MPTs before sitting for the exam. So practicing them becomes critical. And if you're figuring out or finding that it's so hard to fit into your schedule, remember that do it in the morning, right? Wake up at 9, do it in 90 minutes and then move on. Or do it on a Saturday morning, do it in 90 minutes and then have the rest of your day. It's critical to fit these in. Try to do 2 per week, 2 to 3 per week.
Yeah, absolutely. If you think about the composition too of the MPT, you want to be able to practice in every kind that there is, right? And you know, when it comes to the persuasive and the objective MPTs, you know, that's the most highly tested, right? But you also want to test yourself on the other kinds of MPTs that may not be a memo or a brief or something like that, right? You know, a demand letter, you know, or, you know, of course, some of those wild cards, you know, things like that. And so you want to be able to test yourself on the different kinds of MPTs that there are. Of course, doing probably the more MPTs in things like briefs and memos, both objective and persuasive, but do not ignore the fact that there are many different kinds of MPTs that you can be tested on. And so you want to actually try to practice all of those so that you're not shocked when you get a wild card. You know, when students had to draft, I think, articles of organization, they were like, oh my God, what is this? You know, and also remember, you're given the instructions, right? But you want to practice with as many different kinds of instructions as possible, because the number one complaint from the NCBE is that students lack of following instructions. So just so to highlight what Brittany said, just because everything is in front of you does not mean that you don't need to practice it, because even when everything's in front of you, the NCBE says students aren't following instructions. So you want to practice really following those instructions as many times as possible. Oops. Okay, so a few things, you know, if you have any questions, you can definitely put them in the question bar for us here. This is going to be available for you on YouTube to watch, and we'll make it available on our website as well. And if you are, you know, wanting to see anything more about, you know, what we offer or anything, our website is lawtutors.net. And if you accidentally type in lawtutors.com, it will always also take you to our website. The email, you can email our education coordinator, Brittany, at educationcoordinator@lawtutors.net, or call us. We have a lot of free resources available too for you in our free resources section on the website. A lot of articles available for you. And Brittany, myself, and Melissa do teach all of our bar workshops that you heard Andres talking about and Deb talking about. And those start in a couple of weeks, and we love them. And I think our students really get a lot out of them too, because you do have this really sort of personalized atmosphere. And on those bar workshops, you actually get to show up and be there, and we see you and you see us. You're not just out there in webinar land. And it's very interactive. So but most of all, we just hope that this has not only given you additional information, but maybe put your mind at ease about this exam, and sort of this relative unknown, because it's no longer an unknown. There is a difference because it is now a full exam versus a partial exam, but still the setup of being online and the practice of being online is all going to be the way it was before. So it's no longer so much of a mystery. And not only that, it's actually, you know, according to these students and some other students, a sort of a pleasant experience, not having to, depending on where you are, whether you're trekking in the snow or trekking in the sunshine here in California, it's still trekking somewhere. And, you know, lots of people around you sitting that's another thing, you know, squished quarters. Some places I know, for example, here in California, you know, lots of people taking the exam having to sit in these little squished areas. I've heard from a lot of left-handed students, it can be difficult when they're bumping arms with the right-handed student. Stuff like that. I remember when my sister was taking the MCAT, it was the same thing, you know, she kept bumping arms with the right-handed person. So there are some really great great things about taking the exam. I'm going to put myself on mute because of the helicopter above me.
You can make your own space comfortable. That would be my favorite part. When I took the Massachusetts bar, the tables that they gave us to use were so uncomfortable. And it sounds weird to say that a table was uncomfortable, but I took the bar exam in the dark ages where you had to handwrite. So you were like leaning into the table and the chairs were uncomfortable. So I would be excited about creating my own space in my home or in my law school or wherever it is, where I can pick my chair and pick my surroundings. And you don't, my last piece of advice to you guys would be be confident you can do this. And whether the exam is online or in person, going in with confidence is going to be key. But also, without violating any of the proctoring rules, make that space around you as comfortable as possible. You know what I mean? Like, have things around, you can't really have things around you, but like, have things in that room. Maybe it's a air freshener plug-in thing that smells really nice and kind of keeps you calm. Those things sound little and small, but you're going to be stuck in that space for a long time. So make it comfortable.
Absolutely.
I think too, just like kind of my last piece of advice, I think would be to just like have confidence. I think that and don't be too hard on yourself. I think that studying in a pandemic is hard enough. And so give yourself breaks. Make sure you take care of your mental health during this time. It's a hard time for mental health, regardless of the bar exam. So you just really want to make sure you're taking care of yourself.
Absolutely. Well, it was wonderful to do this webinar for all of you. And if there are any questions, please put them in the chat. Otherwise, we hope to see you soon, and whether it be in a workshop or in any of other webinars, or you can, of course, always email us. And of course, first, and foremost, good luck on the exam. And I really think that, equipped with this sort of information, you have all of the necessary tools to really do well on the exam in these unusual times. All right, everyone. Thank you.